In this video, we are going to be reviewing Odoo settings and general configuration. To access settings across all applications and the database as a whole, click on the Settings app from your main dashboard. This will load up the general settings that gives you quick links to managing users, inviting new users, managing some company information, etc. Additionally, from here, you can search for configuration options across all applications. So by searching address, I am searching all settings that contain the word address across any applications or modules that I have installed. This is really helpful to quickly find the setting that you may need, even if you don't know exactly what application it would belong to. Additionally, when reviewing settings, you will see some icons that give you additional context for where this setting will be used. For example, if you see a globe icon, this indicates that this setting is set per website and that each website can have its own configuration for this setting. Additionally, you will see a building icon, and the building icon indicates that this is a company-specific setting, and therefore each company can have its own configuration for this setting. It's also worth noting that by selecting certain configurations, upon save, Odoo will automatically install modules that may be needed to provide the functionality for that configuration. This also means that you could choose to unselect a setting, and when you save, you may get a notice telling you that certain modules would be uninstalled by saving that setting. So it is important to be conscious of this as you are changing your settings if you're turning any settings off. Next, we will discuss users. There are three types of users within Odoo, though you'll only see these user types if you are in debug mode, which we now are for purposes of reviewing this. The user types are internal user, so this is a user that has access to the backend of your Odoo database, likely an employee. There is also the portal user. A portal user is essentially a customer or vendor type account. It gives the user a login and they can access certain records that are related to their user or their related company within their account. And then lastly, there is the public user. So the public user you do not create specific users for. This is a generic user that is used as a template user for those that are just navigating around your website when they are not logged in for purposes of displaying public price lists and providing a basic set of permissions. Because we're currently in debug, you will also see a related partner. So every user has a contact that is created to be associated with their user. So we'll now leave debug mode to look at basic user configuration. The name is the name of the user, and the email address should be the email address of the user. Of course, you could do what we have here, which is a non-email address. However, then you would need to manually send the sign-up link to the user, as there would be no email address to send the user invite to. Additionally, it's worth noting that the email address must be unique per user in your Odoo database. So you cannot have an internal user that has the same email address as a portal user, for example. The email address is a uniqueness constraint field within Odoo, so it is required to be unique, otherwise you will not be able to save the record. As we scroll down, we see that there are sections of permissions that are broken out per application. Sometimes you will see only one or two permissions like user or administrator, but in other cases you will see more fine-tuned permissions that you can apply to a specific user. These are all backed up by groups, which we will discuss more when we are reviewing debug. Additionally, in preferences, this is where you can set your language, time zone, notifications, etc. So as far as the language is concerned, in order to install a new language and thus for a user to use that language as they navigate around Odoo, these are additional languages in the database that must be activated, and once activated can be set in the user's preferences. In fact, languages are a good example of a setting in your general settings within Odoo where by selecting an additional language you would like to add, you are activating a language. And when doing that, you can also select a website that you would like to translate, in which case it will attempt to translate components of your website that have translatable terms on them. For the time zone, you want this to be the time zone that the user is located within. And then notifications. So in general, if you're not an internal user, your notifications are going to be handled by email. But if you are an internal user, you have two options: handle by email or handle in Odoo. If you choose to handle your notifications by email, then an email will be sent to you when you receive a notification like a message or an activity on a record within Odoo. However, if you choose to handle it in Odoo, you will not receive an email, but instead you will see these notifications appear up here in your menu bar within Odoo. Of course, then you can set your email signature for your automatic signature on emails and add a digital signature to use throughout Odoo as well. Additionally, when thinking about setting up users, it's worth noting that in your general settings, you can configure default access rights. So by selecting default access rights and clicking to configure them, you will land on an archived user. So this archived user is essentially what is going to provide the permission set for all new users as they are created. As we can see right now, essentially everybody would have the highest level of permissions upon creation of a user. However, that is likely not what would be intended, so we could change this to user-owned documents for sales and click Save. And now when we choose to create a new user, they will have user-owned documents only for sales as a default permission. Additionally, in users, you can remove the internal users filter to see all users, including portal users, and you can choose to use the filter for inactive users to see users that have been inactivated. Now, over time, this will include users that are no longer with your company, for example. But to start, what you are actually going to see are some default user templates that Odoo has to serve as the foundation for certain permission sets. So we have the public user, which we already discussed. We have the portal user, which we talked about as well. So these two inactive users are the permission sets essentially for public and portal users. We have the default user template that we just took a look at, and we also have OdooBot. OdooBot is a system user that performs actions on behalf of the database. So for example, if you have reordering rules when they run, if they make an RFQ, then this RFQ is going to have been created by OdooBot because it is system generated. Now, really quickly, while we are on the topic of OdooBot, we are going to enter debug mode. And the reason that we are doing this is we want to jump to the related partner. And I always recommend that you rename OdooBot and give it a more appropriate email that is company branded. The reason for doing so is that OdooBot is occasionally used to send emails. So when OdooBot does happen to send out an email, you want it to look branded and look like it's coming from your company, in which case OdooBot and an email with @example.com is really not putting your best foot forward in terms of branding. Moving on from users, we will take a look at company settings. The company settings are pretty straightforward. You must provide it a name and select the default currency for the company. Additionally, of course, it would be good practice to enter an address, phone number, email address, website, and a logo, as these will be used throughout Odoo, for example, on your documents that are printed. And while discussing company settings, we would be remiss if we didn't also look at the general settings for your documents. When you first start using Odoo, you will want to configure your document layout. And when you click on this, you will get a pop-up modal where you can select from several layouts, as well as change the colors or fonts that are used on your report. But note that just as I said earlier, your address, email address, phone number, and logo will all be used for display on documents. Now let's take a look at some further configuration that we will have access to by activating developer mode. Once we're in developer mode, we can go back into settings, and we will see that we have access to groups in our users and companies menu item. Groups, as I stated, are the underpinnings of all permission sets. So for example, if we look at expenses administrator, we will see all users that are a part of this group. And note that you can quickly give multiple users access to a certain permission group by adding them here versus adding them on the employee records themselves. Beyond that, we will see any permission groups that are inherited. So in the case of an administrator, which is essentially a corollary to a manager or a highest level of permissions within an application, you are going to inherit the group that is of a lower permission set. So any permissions that are provided by this group are layered upon the base permissions of the groups that they inherit. You'll also see that you're provided the overview of the menus that this group will have access to, as well as any views or access rights and record rules, which ultimately control what a user can view, create, delete, etc. Additionally, if we go back to users while in debug, we will see a whole new section of permission sets. So these are technical groups that you only see when you're in debug mode. And just like with all other permission sets, by selecting these, you are toggling on a technical group for this particular user. We also see that we have more smart buttons across the top of our record here. So smart buttons allow us to jump to a set of records that apply to this particular record or are related in some way. So in the case of this user, I can jump to groups and see all groups that this user is a part of, as well as the access rights and record rules that apply to this specific user, which can be helpful when troubleshooting. Additionally, being in debug allows us to get to all sorts of great functionality, such as our outgoing and incoming mail servers, which we'll cover in other videos, and just a general host of technical settings and configuration that we may not otherwise have access to. It's worth noting while we're in debug that in addition to configuration and permission sets that we may not otherwise see or be able to toggle, debug provides a very valuable service in terms of just technical data you can get from using the Odoo UI. For example, you can hover over a field to see the field name, and if it's a selection field, what the selection options are. It can also expose things in views, For example, these technical settings that we didn't see until we were in debug mode, these are only visible within this view when you're in debug mode because it is a group that you can specify on the view. And last but not least, by clicking the bug icon up here, we will see all sorts of other things that you would get into if you are working in a technical capacity within Odoo, such as the ability to view all fields or access and edit the different views. While we're here, it is also helpful to know that you can view metadata when you are within debug, which pops up a modal that shows you when the record was last created or edited and by who, as well as its XML ID if one is present. Additionally, we see this purple teardrop on an app that we installed in a recent video. Now, that indicates that a tour is available for the app to get you started with configuration and usage. However, if you have used Odoo or you don't want to follow along with the tours, these can be easily disabled when in debug by clicking the bug icon and selecting Disable Tours. And of course, when you're ready to leave debug mode, just select the icon and leave developer tools.